crimson pooling on the cracked cobblestones was the only sound echoing through the forgotten tunnels beneath Seattle. Audrey knelt beside a dying predator who ruled the city's shadows, offering her own vein to save him. What he did next shattered every myth she ever knew. This is their true story. Records from Harborview Medical Center in November 2019 show that Dr. Audrey Sinclair abruptly resigned from her position as the head of the hematology department. The official reason cited was burnout. The truth, buried deep within classified incident reports at the Seattle Police Department, is far darker. Audrey didn't leave her job. She was taken into a world most of us pretend doesn't exist. Audrey was a brilliant, pragmatic woman. She specialized in rare blood disorders, dedicating her life to studying anomalous hemoglobin structures. For 6 months prior to her disappearance, she had been receiving highly classified, heavily redacted blood samples from a private contractor, known only as Arthur Hayes. The samples defied every known law of human biology. The red blood cells regenerated at an astonishing rate, yet they were extremely sensitive to ultraviolet radiation and certain heavy metals. Audrey thought she was studying a new strain of leukemia. She had no idea she was analyzing the blood of the undead. On a freezing, rain-swept Tuesday night, Audrey was working late in her basement lab. The security cameras outside Harborview show a black SUV pulling up to the loading dock at exactly 11:42 p.m. 3 men in tailored black suits stepped out. Among them was Arthur Hayes, clutching his side, bleeding profusely. He bypassed the hospital's security protocols and kicked open Audrey's laboratory door. He didn't ask for her help. He demanded it. "Pack your equipment, Dr. Sinclair." Hayes panted his face, pale, his eyes wide with a terrifying urgency. "He's dying, and if he dies, this city burns." Before Audrey could call security, Hayes slammed a metal briefcase onto her desk. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, easily $500,000. But it wasn't the money that convinced her. It was the second item in the case. A glass vial filled with a pitch-black, sludgy substance that was literally eating through the glass. "Whatever is in his veins is necrotizing his tissue. You have 20 minutes to find a cure," Hayes warned. Audrey was thrown into the back of the SUV, her portable centrifuge and medical bags tossed in beside her. They drove frantically toward Pioneer Square, the historic heart of Seattle. But they didn't stop at a building. They parked in a deserted alleyway behind Yesler Way, where a heavy rusted iron grate led down into the Seattle underground, the forgotten subterranean ruins of the original city that burned down in 1889. The air down there was suffocating, smelling of damp earth and copper. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating brick archways and abandoned Victorian storefronts. Deep within this subterranean labyrinth, surrounded by a dozen heavily armed guards, lay Gabriel Ashcroft. Gabriel was a phantom in Seattle's high society, rumored to be a reclusive billionaire who owned half the real estate in the Pacific Northwest. Seeing him in person, Audrey was immediately struck by an aura that commanded absolute submission. Even dying, he was terrifyingly beautiful. His skin was the color of alabaster, but thick, web-like black veins pulsed violently up his neck and across his jawline. He was convulsing on a makeshift medical table, his chest heaving as he gasped for air that his lungs didn't seem to need. "What is he?" Audrey whispered, her medical training short-circuiting as she looked at his elongated canine teeth. "He is the king of this territory," Hayes replied grimly. "And someone just slipped a synthetic neurotoxin into his supply." Audrey didn't have time to process the reality of vampires. The doctor in her took over. She drew a sample of Gabriel's blood, her hands shaking as his cold, piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. Even in blinding agony, Gabriel's gaze felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. "You shouldn't be here, human." Gabriel's voice was a ragged, deep gravel that vibrated in her bones. "Run. Run. When I lose control, I will tear you apart. Hold still, Audrey ordered, surprising herself with her own authority. She ran his blood through her portable analyzer. The results on her laptop screen were catastrophic. The pathogen was a bioengineered nightmare, a molecular compound combining colloidal silver and a highly concentrated derivative of belladonna. It was designed to latch onto his regenerative cells and corrupt them, turning his own immortal healing factor against him. The silver was acting as a conductor, literally frying his nervous system from the inside out. His cells are breaking down, Audrey told Hayes, panic rising in her throat. The silver is binding to his hemoglobin. I can't synthesize a chelating agent fast enough. Standard dialysis won't work. The equipment will melt. Gabriel let out a guttural, agonizing roar, his back arching off the table. The stone walls of the underground chamber trembled. The guards raised their weapons, terrified of their own king. If his heart stops, the necrosis becomes permanent, Hayes shouted over the noise. He turns to fix him, Doctor. Audrey stared at the laptop. There was only one biological mechanism strong enough to filter out a poison, this aggressive, a living, beating human cardiovascular system. But not just any human. It required a specific, incredibly rare genetic mutation to process the heavy metals without instantly inducing cardiac arrest. It required Artnal blood. The golden blood. Audrey stared at her own trembling hands. She was one of the 43 people on the planet diagnosed with Rh-null blood. Silence fell over the cavernous underground room as Audrey stepped closer to Gabriel. The black veins had reached his collarbone, creeping steadily toward his heart. He had mere minutes left. Tell your men to lower their weapons, Audrey said to Hayes, her voice eerily calm. Doctor, what are you doing? Hayes demanded. I'm giving him a biological filter, she replied, shedding her white medical coat. My blood is Rh-null. It lacks all 61 antigens in the Rh system. It's a universal donor on a molecular level. But more importantly, my red blood cells have a unique structural integrity. If he feeds on me, my blood will act as a natural dialysis machine. It will bind to the silver and flush the belladonna out of his system. Gabriel, fighting through the blinding pain, violently shook his head. No, he growled, sweat pouring down his pale face. The toxin, it will transfer to you. It will kill you. I'm a doctor. My oath is to save my patient, Audrey said, stepping into his personal space. The proximity to him was intoxicating. A primal magnetic pull radiated from Gabriel, an ancient allure designed to hypnotize prey. But Audrey didn't feel like prey. She felt a profound, inexplicable connection to the lonely, dying immortal thrashing on the table. She unbuttoned the collar of her blouse, exposing the delicate pulse point on her neck. Do it, she whispered, leaning over him. Gabriel's eyes dilated the irises, swallowing the blue until they were pitch black. The scent of her rare, golden blood cut through the metallic stench of the poison. It was a temptation no starving vampire could resist. With a desperate feral groan, Gabriel grabbed her waist, pulling her down against his freezing chest. His fangs pierced her throat. Audrey gasped as a rush of euphoric endorphins flooded her brain, a biological defense mechanism triggered by the vampire's bite to numb the pain. But the euphoria was short-lived. The moment Gabriel began to draw her blood, the bioengineered poison began to flow in reverse, siphoning out of his veins and pouring into hers. Fire exploded in Audrey's chest. The colloidal silver and belladonna hit her mortal bloodstream like liquid glass. She collapsed against him, her legs giving out. Gabriel felt the exact moment her heart began to stutter. He felt the horrific burning heavy metals leaving his body and poisoning the brave, foolish woman who had just sacrificed herself for a monster. Through the haze of his bloodlust, a fierce, protective rage ignited within him. He had lived for 400 years, conquering empires and surviving wars, but he had never witnessed an act of such selfless grace. She was going to die. Her fragile human heart was already going into ventricular fibrillation. The toxin was too much. No, Gabriel thought his mind clearing as her pure blood washed away his delirium. I will not let you fall. Using every ounce of his returning strength, Gabriel violently ripped his fangs away from her throat. Audrey slumped backward, violently seizing her lips, turning a bruised shade of blue. The black veins that had plagued Gabriel were now creeping up Audrey's pale neck. "Audrey," Hayes screamed, rushing forward, but Gabriel threw him back with a flick of his wrist. Gabriel's own healing factor was only halfway restored. The poison was still lingering in his lower extremities, but he didn't care. He needed to override the neurotoxin in her system immediately. Human medicine couldn't save her now. Only immortal biology could. Without a second of hesitation, Gabriel brought his own wrist to his mouth. His fangs effortlessly sliced through his pale flesh, tearing open his radial artery. Thick crimson blood, rich with centuries of ancient regenerative power, welled up from the wound. He pulled Audrey's trembling body into his arms, cradling her head. "Drink," he commanded softly, prying her blue lips apart. He pressed his bleeding wrist against her mouth, letting his immortal blood flow directly down her throat. Audrey choked her body, rejecting the heavy metallic taste, but Gabriel held her steady, his hand stroking her hair. "Breathe, Audrey. Let it burn. Let it heal you," he whispered frantically, his forehead resting against hers. As Gabriel's blood hit her stomach, the reaction was explosive. Audrey arched violently in his arms, a blood-curdling scream tearing from her throat. The ancient vampire blood waged a brutal war against the synthetic silver toxin inside her human veins. The cavern was bathed in the echoing sounds of her agony. Gabriel held her tight, absorbing her thrashing, whispering ancient promises in a language long forgotten by the modern world. He was draining himself. By forcing his regenerative blood into her, he was starving his own body of the resources it needed to finish fighting off the poison. The black necrotizing veins began to creep back up Gabriel's neck. He was taking the poison back, trading his life for hers, drop by drop. Audrey's seizing finally slowed. Her breathing, which had been ragged and shallow, suddenly deepened. The sickly blue tint of her skin was replaced by a flushed, unnatural warmth. She opened her eyes, and for a terrifying second, her irises flashed with the same pitch-black intensity as Gabriel's. She was alive, but she was no longer entirely human. Gabriel gave her a weak, exhausted smile before his eyes rolled back. His body went entirely limp, collapsing onto the cold stone floor of the underground chamber. "Gabriel!" Audrey screamed, the strength in her voice, startling even herself. She scrambled to her knees, grabbing his shoulders. His skin was turning to ice. The King of Seattle had fallen, and Audrey's nightmare was only just beginning. The Seattle Underground was notoriously frigid in November, a damp, bone-chilling cold that seeped through the 19th century brickwork. But as Audrey Sinclair knelt beside Gabriel Ashcroft's lifeless body, she realized she could no longer feel the cold. In fact, she could feel everything else with a terrifying, agonizing clarity. She could hear the rhythmic, panicked beating of Arthur Hayes's heart from 10 feet away. She could smell the exact chemical composition of the damp soil beneath the cobblestones, the oxidized copper of old pipes, and the sharp, alkaline scent of the synthetic belladonna that had nearly killed the immortal king. Most shockingly, she could feel the slow, sludgy, almost imperceptible thud of Gabriel's heart beneath his frozen chest. He was not dead. He had entered a deep, self-induced coma, a biological failsafe designed to preserve his vital organs while his body attempted to purge the remaining heavy metals. "Dr. Sinclair," Hayes stammered, stepping forward carefully, as if approaching a wild animal. "Your eyes." Audrey blinked, the pitch-black darkness of her irises slowly receding back to her natural hazel, though a ring of predatory gold now permanently encircled her pupils. She ignored Hayes, her clinical training roaring back to life, supercharged by the ancient supernatural adrenaline now coursing through her veins. Gabriel had saved her by forcing his regenerative blood into her failing human heart. But in doing so, he had sacrificed his own healing factor. The silver toxin was still trapped in his lower extremities, slowly crystallizing his veins. "We need to move him back onto the table," Audrey commanded. Her voice didn't shake. It resonated with an unnatural, commanding echo that made Hayes instantly step forward to obey. When Audrey grabbed Gabriel's shoulders to lift him, she nearly threw him across the room. Her muscles fired with an explosive, impossible strength. A human woman weighing barely 130 pounds had just lifted a fully grown, dense, immortal male as if he were made of balsa wood. She didn't have time to marvel at her new biology. She had a patient to save. The neurotoxin is causing a severe hemolytic crisis in his lower vascular system, Audrey said, tearing open her emergency medical kits with blinding speed. His body is in torpor trying to freeze the poison in place, but the silver is too corrosive. It will eventually reach his brain. We need to perform a continuous renal replacement therapy, but I don't have a dialysis machine. Then what do we do? Hayes asked, his stoic demeanor cracking as he looked at his dying king. I become the machine. Again, Audrey stated grimly. But this time we control it. She quickly instructed Hayes to raid the emergency blood supply kept in the underground bunker's cold storage. Gabriel kept dozens of bags of O-negative blood for his guards, sourced quietly through illicit channels connected to the Puget Sound Blood Center. Audrey needed volume. She took a sterile scalpel and, without flinching, made a deep incision on her own forearm. She watched in clinical fascination as the wound instantly stitched itself closed in a matter of seconds. Gabriel's blood had turned her into a rapid healing hybrid. I need IV lines large bore, Audrey barked. I am going to create a closed-loop biological circuit. I will hook my arterial line to his venous line, and his arterial line to my venous line. My liver and kidneys are now functioning at a superhuman capacity thanks to his blood. I will filter the belladonna and silver out of him, process it through my own organs, and flush it out. But I need you to continuously push the O-negative donor blood into my system, so I don't go into hypovolemic shock. As Hayes scrambled to set up the IV poles, a heavy metallic slam echoed down the subterranean corridor. The heavy iron grate that sealed the Yesloway entrance had just been breached. Hayes froze his hand, dropping to the tactical sidearm holstered at his hip. That's impossible. The perimeter is secured by biometric locks. Someone overrode them, Audrey said, her newly enhanced hearing picking up the distinct sound of combat boots marching over the historic brickwork. She could hear the distinct hum of high-frequency ultraviolet emitters spinning up military-grade weaponry designed specifically for hunting immortals. It's Nathaniel, Hayes whispered, his face draining of color. Nathaniel Croft. He's Gabriel's second-in-command. He oversees all security protocols for the Seattle territory. The realization hit Audrey like a physical blow. The bioengineered poison wasn't a random assassination attempt from a rival human faction. It was a coup. Nathaniel Croft had orchestrated the poisoning, likely aligning himself with Jonathan Pierce, a ruthless, Bellevue-based tech magnate, known in underground whispers to fund anti-immortal paramilitary squads. Pierce provided the synthetic silver belladonna toxin, and Nathaniel slipped it into Gabriel's private blood supply. Now Nathaniel was here to ensure the King of Seattle was truly dead. Hook up the lines, Audrey snarled, grabbing the heavy gauge needles. Do it now, Arthur. With trembling hands, Hayes established the intravenous connection between Audrey and Gabriel. The moment their blood streams connected through the plastic tubing, a violent jolt of electricity surged through Audrey's spine. It was not just a medical transfusion, it was a profound, telepathic tether. She gasped as a flood of raw, fragmented memories crashed into her mind, centuries of Gabriel's life. She saw the Great Fire of London in 1666. She felt the biting cold of the Russian tundra, and she felt the crushing, suffocating loneliness of outliving everyone he had ever loved. "I am with you." A deep, resonant voice echoed within her mind. It wasn't spoken aloud. It was Gabriel, his consciousness, reaching out from the dark abyss of his coma, clinging to the golden warmth of her blood. "Hold the line, Arthur," Audrey whispered, her eyes locking onto the heavy wooden doors of the medical bay as the sounds of gunfire erupted outside. "Do whatever it takes. Buy us time." The medical bay doors shook violently as high-caliber rounds impacted the reinforced steel plating. Outside, in the cavernous ruins of the Seattle Underground, Arthur Hayes and Gabriel's remaining loyalists were engaging in a brutal, desperate firefight against Nathaniel Croft's vanguard mercenaries. Audrey sat perfectly still on a steel chair next to the surgical table, her arm tethered to Gabriel by twin rivers of crimson flowing through the clear plastic tubing. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The pain was excruciating. As Gabriel's poisoned blood entered her system, her hybrid organs worked furiously to break down the colloidal silver and synthetic belladonna. Her newly enhanced liver felt like it was submerged in boiling water, but she refused to break the connection. She focused on the rhythm of Gabriel's heart monitor, watching the sluggish line slowly begin to spike into a healthy, aggressive rhythm. "Almost there," Audrey choked out, squeezing her eyes shut. She could feel his cells regenerating. She could feel the necrotizing black veins fading from his pale skin, replaced by the vibrant, flawless complexion of an apex predator, restored to his full glory. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the reinforced doors. Smoke and brick dust flooded the medical bay. Audrey coughed her enhanced vision, cutting through the debris. Standing in the ruined doorway was Nathaniel Croft. He was a tall, aristocratic vampire with cold grey eyes, wearing a bespoke suit ruined by ash and blood. In his hand, he held a heavy tactical shotgun loaded with incendiary white phosphorus rounds. Behind him, the bodies of Gabriel's loyal guards littered the cobblestones. Arthur Hayes was nowhere to be seen. "How touching!" Nathaniel sneered, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain as he stepped into the room, leveling the weapon at Audrey. The great Gabriel Ashcroft reduced to relying on a human blood bag to survive. Though looking at your eyes, Dr. Sinclair, you aren't exactly human anymore, are you? "You poisoned your own king," Audrey stated, her voice dangerously low. She did not reach to disconnect the IV lines. She needed just 2 more minutes to completely flush Gabriel's system. "Kings grow stagnant," Nathaniel replied coldly. "Gabriel refused to expand our territory. He coddled the humans. Jonathan Pierce and I have a new vision for the Pacific Northwest, one where we do not hide in the damp ruins of 1889. Nathaniel racked the shotgun, the metallic clack echoing like a death knell. "It's a pity, Doctor. Your Rochnol blood is a scientific marvel, but you are standing in the way of progress." He pulled the trigger. Time seemed to slow down for Audrey. Her heightened senses tracked the blazing white phosphorus round as it erupted from the barrel. But before she could even flinch, a blur of impossible speed intercepted the shot. The heavy surgical table was flipped upward with a deafening crash, acting as a steel shield. The incendiary round slammed into the metal, detonating in a blinding flash of white heat. The IV line snapped, spraying blood across the stone floor. When the smoke cleared, Nathaniel Croft took a sudden, terrified step backward. Standing in front of Audrey completely unharmed was Gabriel Ashcroft. He was shirtless, his alabaster skin flawless, his muscles coiled tight with an ancient, terrifying wrath. The black veins were entirely gone. His eyes, fixed on his former second-in-command, were glowing with a predatory luminous blue that illuminated the dark room. "Nathaniel." Gabriel's voice was a soft, rumbling earthquake that vibrated the dust off the ceiling. "You have made a grave miscalculation. Nathaniel let out a feral hiss, dropping the useless shotgun and lunging forward, his own fangs descending. He moved with the blinding speed of a centuries-old vampire aiming to tear Gabriel's throat out. But Gabriel didn't just meet the attack. He utterly dismantled it. With a brutal, effortless grace, Gabriel sidestepped Nathaniel's lunge. He reached out his hand, clamping around Nathaniel's throat like a steel vise. The momentum of the rogue vampire was halted instantly, his feet dangling off the floor as Gabriel hoisted him into the air. Nathaniel clawed desperately at Gabriel's arm, but the King of Seattle was unyielding. The ancient blood that Audrey had just filtered and purified hummed with a renewed explosive power. You plotted with humans. You brought poison into my sanctuary. Gabriel whispered softly, his glowing eyes narrowing. But your greatest sin was threatening what is mine. Gabriel glanced back at Audrey, who was clutching her bleeding arm, breathing heavily. The telepathic tether between them flared to life, a rush of fierce, possessive warmth flooding Audrey's mind. Gabriel turned his attention back to the traitor. With a sickening structural crunch, Gabriel tightened his grip. Nathaniel's eyes went wide with agony before his body suddenly burst into a violent cloud of grey ash, the centuries of his immortal life instantly incinerated by the lethal force of his king's bare hands. The ash settled gently onto the damp cobblestones, leaving the medical bay in absolute breathless silence. Gabriel stood amidst the ruin, his broad chest heaving slightly. Slowly he turned to Audrey. The terrifying aura of the apex predator melted away, replaced by a profound, reverent gentleness. He crossed the room in the blink of an eye, falling to his knees before her. He took her bleeding arm, his cold, long fingers gently tracing the jagged incision she had made to save him. He lifted her arm to his lips, but not to feed. He kissed the wound. A soft, numb, tingling sensation spread across her skin, and Audrey watched in awe as the torn flesh instantly knitted itself back together, leaving not even a scar. You gave me your life. Audrey Sinclair, Gabriel murmured, looking up at her. His blue eyes filled with an emotion so intense it made her breath catch in her throat. And I gave you my blood. You are no longer bound by the fragility of mortal time. Audrey reached out her hand, trembling slightly as she touched his cold, perfectly sculpted cheek. She could feel the rhythm of his heart now beating in perfect symbiotic synchronization with her own. What am I now, Gabriel? She whispered. You are my savior, he replied, leaning forward to rest his forehead against hers in the shadowed ruins of the underground. My equal. And from this night until the end of days. My queen. The official records of the Seattle Police Department eventually closed the missing persons case of Dr. Audrey Sinclair, citing a lack of physical evidence and unresolved leads. Harborview Medical Center quietly absorbed her department, and the scientific world lost one of its most brilliant hematologists to the cold Pacific Northwest rain. But in the hushed, terrified whispers of the criminal underworld and the elite ballrooms of Bellevue, a new legend was born. Jonathan Pierce's corporate empire mysteriously crumbled overnight, his vanguard mercenaries dismantling themselves in fear of a sudden, brutal retaliation from the shadows. A shift in power had occurred beneath the city streets. Gabriel Ashcroft, the immortal sovereign of the rainy city, was no longer a lonely king ruling from the darkness. By his side stood a woman who bridged the gap between science and the supernatural, a mortal who offered her blood to save a monster, only to have the monster tear open his own veins to save her. Theirs was a romance forged in poison and sealed in eternity, a closed-loop biological tether that proved even the undead could be resurrected by absolute, selfless devotion. They say if you walk the damp alleys behind Yesla Way at midnight, You might catch a glimpse of them two predators moving with impossible grace, forever bound by the golden blood that saved a dying king. This unbelievable tale of sacrifice, medical miracles, and a vampire king's ultimate devotion proves that sometimes the darkest shadows hold the most intense romances. What do you think about Audrey's choice to risk her humanity for Gabriel? Would you have offered your blood to save him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this intense, real-life inspired urban fantasy, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance and thriller lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more dark, thrilling stories. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a tale from the shadows. See you in the next one.